Alright there, so another in my series of not Gonzo movie reviews. And this movie I know nothing about. Well, I know it's called KOKO-Di KOKO-DA, and it was made in 2019. This was suggested to someone, it was, well, suggested to me in fact, in the comments of another one of my not Gonzo movie reviews. So let's have a watch. It's quite amazing what we've lost with all the technology that's kind of erupted. It's been kind of culturally effervescent over the last 30-40 years. Because it's almost impossible to see a movie like this these days. I don't mean a movie like this in terms of content, but a movie that you know nothing about. Like I said, I know the name and when it was made. I know the name because the bloke recommended it, and I knew when it was made because when I pressed play it said 2019, and so I haven't got a clue. I mean, books have kind of largely saved themselves from this. I mean, as a writer it's a peculiar thing to say, but thankfully not many people read books. Certainly people who use social media a lot don't tend to be readers. I remember when I bought David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. I bought it because it was a big slab of a book. I liked the cover, and I was going to Thailand for 9 weeks to do withdrawal, and I thought that's a big slab of text that I can get into when I can't do anything else. Little did I know that it was the most spoken about book that year, written by one of the most spoken about authors of that century. You know, I try and avoid all that stuff because I don't. It's very hard to have your part in the production of something's meaning when loads of other people have already told you what it means, what it's about, etc., etc. And I've said in one of these reviews before that watching movies scares me because they're gonna change the way I feel, and that's not a strong point for me. I like to control my emotions, and yeah, I only discovered Nirvana, the band, 2 years ago. I mean, they're pretty good, check them out. But at the time I just couldn't go near it because there was so much interpretation. There was so many platforms and people and all sorts of external sources telling me about Nirvana. What was the point? You know, I wouldn't get a chance. Nirvana didn't stand a chance for me. And as I'm watching this, it's a very, very different experience to watching a movie that you know even just a few things about, the basic story, the people who are in it. I mean, I'm guessing this is a Swedish film. It might be Danish. It's subtitled. There's some beautiful little sort of animated, I suppose is the wrong word, sort of almost sort of puppetry, light puppetry, shadow puppetry. It reminds me of on a Saturday afternoon when you're a kid and after the 3-hour football pools results, Queen of the South 2, Kilmarnock 1. St Mirren was a late result, and you'll be like, oh come on, and there'll be a daisy wheel printer going. Not only did you not know what it was for, but good lord, this has been going on for hours, and a few hours for a kid is a few days in real life. And then when it finally finished, it'll be after the break, cartoons, and you'll be like yes, and you'd be wanting something that had been force fed to you since birth, like Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse. And then when the cartoons came on, occasionally it would be some former Yugoslavian or some Eastern Bloc sort of and you'll be like, whoa. And then it would just be very dark, of the European tradition, you know, sort of cut out shapes moving along. Figures of death everywhere, as is the case with the European storytelling tradition. So there's been people getting ill, and there's been people who may be dying, and there's been these beautiful light puppets interspersed, and yeah, and apparently it's KOKO-Di KOKO-DA, which still means nothing to me. Vienna. Good movie so far. Into this. Into the fact I know nothing about it. What a sacrifice. What a sacrifice information has been. You know, you used to have to go and seek out information. Information in itself is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's beyond good and evil information. But you used to have to go and find it. But now it just comes to you. And there's hardly a place you can go where it isn't coming to you, isn't being force-fed, isn't being shoved into you. You know, the public square is a digital place now, and when you go there, for whatever reason, there's information coming out of every angle, every, you know, you're not allowed to travel within that world without being forced to absorb information you have got no interest in and can't avoid. It was the same with culture. You know, as a young person, as a child, you had to go and find things that you liked. You weren't told what they were. Yeah, of course you were to an extent, but it was just the telly and perhaps the wireless. And but even then, if you heard something on the radio, if you missed a bit at the beginning where he told you it was, or if you stayed up late and caught a film on BBC Two, you didn't know what it was. You didn't know what it was, but you remembered it, and you'd ask people, did anyone see that movie the other night? Blah blah blah, and if no one would know. And I remember when the internet came out, I had a friend, because there was quite a barrier to entry when the internet first came out, but I had a friend who was in computing, and he got me online, and the old dial-up and all that. One of the first things I'd done was track down all those old records that I'd heard as a kid, and all those old movies, and I thought, this is amazing. And it hasn't been amazing. It's caused many... It's caused me to sacrifice, and not just me, of course, our culture. We've sacrificed so much, having all that information at our fingertips has diluted its significance, has diluted its beauty, has diluted its poetic potential.
Hur är det, älskling?
What a dark, wonderfully dark place Europe is. This film is riddled with European symbolism, the European storytelling tradition. They're making connections as well between them. And I'm not going to tell you much about this movie as I review it, because I don't want to take from you what we've had removed from our culture, in what I just was speaking about, in the information saturation. But it's effortlessly European. Not because they've set out to make a European film, but because they're European people making a European film. I think it might have been in Adam Curtis' documentary Bitter Lake, when he talked about when the Americans involved themselves in the Second World War. They didn't quite understand what they were getting into because, well, why would you? But they didn't quite understand that inherent darkness that has defined Europe since and during really the Middle Ages. There's a reason it was called the Dark Ages. And I'm always very inspired by European stories, the European story tradition. What I was read as a child, 5, 6 years old. The death that my parents read to me, Little Red Riding Hood. Think of the story, the Brothers Grimm stories. I used to carry that. I had a hardback book of European fairy tales that I used to carry around. That was my comfort blanket. I had a comfort book of fairy tales, illustrated as well, and would just beg my mum or dad to read me those stories that I knew. Of course I knew them because I'd heard them 1,000 times. And in a world where the construction of childhood has just become ridiculous now. It was wonderful as a 4, 5, 6-year-old to be communicating with an adult, to be sharing something with a parent that was about killing, that was about death, that was about revenge, that was about love, that was about family, that was about the very cornerstones of existence, which have been slowly or rapidly more and more removed from the childhood experience at the cost of a child's ability to develop into an adult in a manageable and successful way. I dread to think what kids get fed culturally these days. Do parents read their children fairy stories? Do European families read their kids European fairy tales? I'm surprised they're not all banned, to be honest with you. They probably will be. I doubt they're in school curriculums. We used to have them. We used to get read them at school, at infant school. With the incredible threat that this period in the story of Europe is going through at the moment, I'm so happy to see this kind of film being made in 2019, because there's a potential for that inherent darkness, that base, that substructure of our people and our lands. There's a chance that will actually be what saves us.
Aha, vad har vi här?
Du måste dra!
Kommer när som helst! KOKO-Di KOKO-DA.
Very nicely, line between reality and paranoia, perhaps fiction, has been blurred, which is film anyway. You know, it's kind of sculpted in time, isn't it? And yet there's been this symbolic theme that actually opened the movie. Had featured very subtly, quickly, that's not the right word, in passing, but has started to become more dominant and central to the direction of the story. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. It's no, I'm just staring at the still now. I'm thinking about the film, and what is it to think about a film? What is it to watch a movie? You know, it's not to consume it. I always go on about this. I'll rattle that one out countless times. You produce meaning with it. You work with it. You fill in the gaps, and this is riddled with them. You know, this is riddled with them. It's you know, you're given little bits. You're given. I think that's really the key with any storytelling. Is what do you give? What with any storytelling, certainly in my writing, it's what I leave out. That's the most important bit. We all know John Cage's the contemporary composer made his piece of music. It's called something like 4 minutes 48, 4 minutes 37. It doesn't really matter. That's the length of the piece, and it was a piece that he put out, and there was a score, but it's just silence. And when it was released, I'm guessing 60s, early 70s. You know, the point being that, you know, music is comprised of silences, without which you don't get music. Melody requires silence, and so when I'm telling a story, whether speaking it or writing it, you know, I'm writing the bits that are missing as much as I'm writing the bits that are present. I'm writing the absences. If I give you that element, how does that change what you've already read? How does that change where things are going? How does that change the feel of this journey? And if I leave it out, what does that do to those things? What does that do to the narrative? What does that do to the structure? And as I said in the Fighter movie, that's structure isn't. We don't have to get concerned with plot here, but just what does it do to that? They've already started. This film's already playing with time. You know, we've already had a couple of, you know, a very sort of typical 3 years later earlier, but now we've had what appears to be a dream, but you're not sure. And if it was a dream, what is a dream in this context? Because there were figures in the dream that have been a part of repeated symbology in the movie, and that's when it's gorgeous. And I like that's the word I mean right at the moment. Gorgeous, delicious. You know, because there's an intellectual feasting. Now that doesn't make it intellectual. It means it's making me think, and I can only think at I can only think as well as I can think. But a director, interesting word, director, can direct the movie. Can direct the presences, direct the absences, direct the story, and direct me, nudge me in directions. Give me themes to consider. And while I'm considering, while I'm gorging on them, there's more coming. While while I'm sort of at it and feasting on the information, there's more coming, but there's less coming, and there's bits I want that aren't going to arrive, and I'm going to have to make do with what I've got. And no, I want gravy with this steak. Well, you ain't getting it. Well, the steak's not the same as it was when I thought gravy was coming. Well, that's how it goes. That's how it works. Great stuff. Great stuff. I'm starting to think of, there's a great German movie, Run Lola Run. I think the translation for the German version is just Lola Runs. German director Tom Tykwer. I bet that's how you say it, yeah. It's definitely Tykwer. Where in that movie, in Run Lola Run, you've got to see that, by the way. You have to see it. They're the rules around here. I'll make the rules around here, son. You want to meet my mate Stanley? Her boyfriend's fucked up some deal and he owes some bloke a load of money, or he's going to get killed. So she goes out to get the money somehow. But you actually see 3 different narratives, 3 different journeys. The first thing she tries fails, but then it starts again and goes back to a particular part in the journey where she makes a different decision. And I won't ruin the film for you, but then she goes back to a part and makes a different decision, and other things in the movie affect her decisions. And you know, the free will, determinism, these are the kinds of things that are being investigated. The story, it's always the story. The story's at the root of life. The story is at the root of analysis. The story is at the root of living. And the story is, of course, at the root, not the end, of dying. And this movie, with all the other things I've told you about it, what's happening, all those themes, all those really solid European themes of love, of death, of murder, of revenge, of family, they're now being interwoven with this sort of sense of free will and determinism, and of course an ongoing questioning of what's happening, what's real, what isn't real, and how that affects how you interpret the story. We end up there again, which is a good thing. I don't wanna watch films and be distracted by things other than story. I don't want to read books and be distracted by other things than story. There's very few things I like doing that I'd rather be distracted from the story. The French have a beautiful word, jouissance. You know, and it means to come, but it also means to play. And poetry is to play with language. To Julia Kristeva says it beautifully, ironically, or appropriately perhaps, where poetic language is any language which threatens the borders of its own enclosure. And that's what happens with jouissance. That's when your poetic engagement with something, your play with something. But you know, I'm playing with myself. I'm watching a movie, and there's plaisir, which is an English word. Yeah, you can probably tell that this is affecting me quite significantly, but I'm also not relying on my usual telling you what's happening, telling you what's going on, because I think this is quite special, and I don't want to give you that anyway. I want to. You know, I feel like I'm on a multitude of boundaries, and and the film is asking of me to step over them, asking of me to remain on one side of them, but it's asking of me to do something on these boundaries. There's no plateaus. There's no moment where I sit and go, okay, I get it. I'm not getting it. I don't get it, and I don't need to get it, because I'm not stupid. You know, I've managed to survive the information saturation. I'm just still there, but clinging on. But you know, it's up to my neck. But I can do that. I can still manage to do that. And the more people do that, the more people are able to do that, the more people think they can do that, the more they can. And the role of the story and the role of the storyteller will increase into the significance it should have always had. And the role of stories in our lives will continue to protect us, and to give us meaning, and to give us lineage, and to give us culture that we're a part of making as well as receiving. We're part of both of that. We're that, you know, that binary is just crumble. It just crumbles when done correctly. What is repetition? What is repetition? I mean, that was repetition, but what is repetition? Because you wouldn't have noticed if it was repetition, because you'd have just thought, well, that was just the same, but it was different because it was repeated. I mean, just enjoy that. It was different because it was repeated. Culture that has a function, culture that has got to do with people and their families, their communities, their history and their futures, is repetition that remains new. Because it's required. It's required. And when you pass a story on to someone, you're repeating it. You're repeating a story. I've repeated stories many times. And yet, even when I tell them, even though I know them, they're very different each time. The same story. Who can't love a movie that can get some knackered old bloke at 3:30 in the morning thinking about repetition being the same as it moves in time? Who can't love that? If you don't love that, that's all right. But if you do love that, oh, the jouissance is killing me.
Rolig nu. Vi vil jo bare lege.
Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. So, what do I leave you with? Children don't believe in ghosts because they're scared. They believe in ghosts to protect them from the knowledge their natural curiosity will bring them. Because in that very simplistic child's mind, the knowledge that their curiosity will give them of the world is going to be stripped right down to the basics, to the bare bones, to the skeleton of their habitat, to love, death, murder, regret, trauma, love. And as adults, and what has been expressed in the Philosophia Perennis, good stories, good storytelling invites the reader the opportunity, the chance, and when successful, the luxury to believe in ghosts again.
Non più tra i farfalloni amoroso, notte e giorno di torno girano, delle belle turbando al riposo, Narcisetto a dolcino d'amor.